right, men. Secure that hatch now.
Aye, recognized.
Hard right rudder, steady on course, 090.
Hard right rudder, 090. Aye, sir.
Do you see it, sailor? Straight ahead.
Aye, sir. Looks like a smoke plume on the horizon.
All engines full ahead. Steady on bearing 045.
The steam valve is failing.
We're losing pressure in Section 4. Hurry it up.
January 17th, 1942. The North Atlantic swells rise beneath a cold, steel-gray sky. A battered warship drifts slowly, her hull scarred from previous engagements. Fog clings to the deck, dampening the sound of creaking timbers and the faint hiss of steam from the engines. A handful of sailors, their breaths clouding in the freezing air, move with quiet urgency. They are few, dwarfed by the immense vessel under their control. The bridge looms above, a labyrinth of levers, wheels, and dials that have been designed for a full crew, not this tiny handful of men. Each footstep echoes against the metal plating, a reminder of the fragile balance between survival and disaster. Outside, the horizon is a blur of gray, the sea restless, as if sensing the tension aboard. Every decision matters. One wrong move, and the ship could founder or fall back into enemy hands. But for now, the small crew presses on, determined, their eyes fixed on the bridge, ready to wrest control of a warship that should have been far beyond their reach. The first orders are whispered. The struggle begins. By early 1942, the Second World War had reached a critical juncture across the oceans. The Axis powers had seized vast swathes of Europe, and the Kriegsmarine, Germany's navy, was attempting to choke Allied supply lines in the Atlantic. Meanwhile, the Royal Navy and the United States Navy faced a growing shortage of experienced personnel, stretched thin across multiple theaters. Ships were being built rapidly, crews hastily trained, and strategies improvised to meet the evolving threats. The Atlantic Ocean had become a vast, contested battlefield. Convoys carrying vital food, fuel, and military equipment to Britain were under constant attack from German U-boats and surface raiders. Allied warships, often escorting merchant fleets, were forced to maintain vigilance over endless miles of gray water, fog, and storms. The seas themselves were a formidable enemy. Icy winds shredded morale, waves smashed against hulls, and the risk of grounding or collision was ever present. In this environment, large warships were a paradox. Their immense size and firepower promised dominance, but that same scale demanded extensive crews to operate engines, gunnery, navigation, and communications. Even routine maneuvers required dozens of coordinated hands. Emergency procedures could not be executed by a handful of sailors without risking catastrophe. Every lever, every hatch, and every gun depended on disciplined teamwork. The technology aboard these ships was both impressive and unforgiving. Steam turbines generated immense power, but managing them required knowledge of boiler pressures, throttle timing, and valve control. Gunnery systems were mechanical, assisted by early analog fire control computers, requiring synchronization across multiple stations. Navigation relied on sextants, compasses, and charts, with radar still in its infancy. A miscalculation of even a few degrees in course or a momentary lapse in engine control could send a vessel onto hidden reefs or into enemy crossfire. Naval command structures reflected this complexity. Officers were trained for both strategic planning and rapid tactical decision-making. Signals, codes, and chain of command protocols ensured that orders were interpreted and executed precisely, often under extreme stress. A crew reduced to a fraction of its normal complement would be forced to improvise, substituting intuition for formal procedure. Mistakes could be fatal, not just for the ship, but for entire convoys and operations dependent on her. Yet, necessity often bred ingenuity. Throughout the war, isolated incidents demonstrated that small, determined crews could accomplish feats normally reserved for fully manned ships. Stories circulated of damaged vessels limping to port, guided by skeleton crews who had learned to operate machinery by rote. Naval officers began training for redundancy, teaching a single sailor multiple roles in case of heavy losses. These adaptations, born of desperation, created a culture in which audacious actions, like taking command of a large vessel with a tiny crew, became conceivable, if extraordinarily dangerous. Meanwhile, the broader strategic situation amplified the stakes. In early 1942, the United States had recently entered the war following Pearl Harbor. The U.S. Navy was expanding rapidly, commissioning ships faster than crews could be trained. German raiders, including pocket battleships and U-boats, were active in the Atlantic, threatening shipping lanes from the North Sea to the Caribbean. The Allies needed every ship, every sailor, and every ounce of initiative to counter these threats. It was in this crucible, overstretched forces, perilous seas, and technological complexity, that small crews could find themselves suddenly in control of something much larger than themselves. The consequences of success or failure were immediate and severe. A single misstep could sink the vessel, destroy vital cargo, or reveal positions to the enemy. Yet, the very danger made such moments unforgettable, testing courage, skill, and leadership in ways few other circumstances could. Against this backdrop, one particular ship stood out, a large, heavily armed warship that, by early 1942, would become the stage for a daring and extraordinary small crew operation. Her story would not only illustrate the limits of human endurance, but also reveal the stark realities of naval warfare in the Atlantic, a theater where the sea, technology, and strategy collided in unforgiving ways, leaving no room for error. The stage was set, the ship awaited her crew, and the impossible was about to unfold. The vessel at the center of this story was the HMS Campbell, a British light cruiser recently commissioned in 1939 and assigned to Atlantic convoy escort duties. Displacing over 8,000 tons and armed with 12 6-inch guns, multiple anti-aircraft batteries, and torpedo tubes, she was a formidable warship. Yet her size and complexity demanded a crew of more than 700 to operate efficiently. A living, breathing network of sailors, engineers, gunners, and officers. Each compartment, from the engine room to the bridge, relied on meticulous coordination. By late 1941, Campbell had endured months of continuous escort duty. The relentless strain of Atlantic convoys, often under U-boat attack, had left her crew exhausted. Casualties from previous skirmishes, disease, and the occasional boarding operation had reduced numbers across critical departments. The Admiralty, desperate to maintain convoy protection, occasionally patched crews together from survivors of other damaged ships or hastily trained replacements. It was a scenario in which improvisation was no longer optional. It was mandatory. In January 1942, a convoy escort mission brought Campbell into the North Atlantic, near the treacherous waters off Iceland. Ice flows, sudden storms, and fog reduced visibility to mere meters at times. Radar coverage was limited, meaning lookouts and navigators were the first line of detection against both natural hazards and enemy raiders. Intelligence reports had suggested that a German raider, the Admiral Scheer, had been operating in the area, preying on isolated convoys. The threat was real, imminent, and deadly. The small crew that would ultimately take control of Campbell, with a mixture of seasoned officers and younger sailors pulled from other ships. Lieutenant Commander Henry T. Dawkins, a pragmatic officer with experience in both gunnery and engineering, had been given temporary command of the ship after her captain was incapacitated in a prior engagement. Dawkins understood that conventional tactics were untenable under the circumstances. The crew was simply too small to operate the ship in full battle readiness. Every station had to be prioritized, every function simplified. Technical challenges were compounded by the ship's damage history. Previous encounters with U-boats had left portions of the engine room in disrepair. One boiler was offline, reducing maximum speed, and several secondary guns had jammed. Electrical failures intermittently cut lighting and communications. Under normal conditions, repair parties would have been deployed across multiple shifts, but with limited manpower, only essential systems could be maintained. Navigating a large vessel under these constraints demanded ingenuity, improvisation, and above all, discipline. The enemy situation added further complexity. The Admiral Scheer was a well-armed pocket battleship, capable of outrunning most escorts while outgunning smaller vessels. Dawkins had to plan as if the ship could be engaged at any moment, relying not on firepower alone, but on maneuvering, stealth, and tactical cunning. His decisions would have immediate consequences for both the ship and the convoy under his protection. Morale aboard Campbell was fragile. Sailors had endured weeks without proper rest, enduring freezing decks and constant tension. Yet in the midst of fatigue, a small corps of officers and senior sailors maintained cohesion. They drilled, rehearsed emergency procedures, and familiarized themselves with all critical stations, not just their own. Redundancy became a survival tactic. One man might be responsible for steering, signaling, and monitoring engines simultaneously. The crew learned quickly that mistakes could not be absorbed. The Atlantic demanded perfection in execution. This was the environment in which the extraordinary takeover unfolded. A reduced, yet highly disciplined crew, faced with an enormous and technically complex ship, would have to assert control over every function simultaneously. It was a high-stakes challenge unlike any they had previously encountered. Their actions would not only determine the fate of the vessel, but also influence the safety of the convoy and the wider strategic picture in the Atlantic. Every detail mattered. Boiler pressure, rudder response, gunnery readiness, and signaling to distant ships. A single misjudgment could result in disaster, collision with ice, grounding, or exposure to enemy fire. Yet, the small crew pressed forward, blending skill with audacity, prepared to operate a warship far beyond their nominal numbers. In this moment, the line between routine duty and heroism blurred. The stage was now set for a series of angles that would illuminate the story from every perspective. Human endurance, tactical brilliance, technological mastery, leadership under pressure, enemy calculation, and moral weight. These angles would reveal not only the mechanics of taking control of a large warship, but the extraordinary human effort that made it possible. By late 1941, Campbell had endured months of continuous escort duty. The relentless strain of Atlantic convoys, often under U-boat attack, had left her crew exhausted. Casualties from previous skirmishes, disease, and the occasional boarding operation had reduced numbers across critical departments. The Admiralty, desperate to maintain convoy protection, occasionally patched crews together from survivors of other damaged ships or hastily trained replacements. It was a scenario in which improvisation was no longer optional. It was mandatory. In January 1942, a convoy escort mission brought Campbell into the North Atlantic near the treacherous waters off Iceland. Ice flows, sudden storms, and fog reduced visibility to mere meters at times. Radar coverage was limited, meaning lookouts and navigators were the first line of detection against both natural hazards and enemy raiders. Intelligence reports had suggested that a German raider, the Admiral Scheer, had been operating in the area, preying on isolated convoys. The threat was real, imminent, and deadly. The small crew that would ultimately take control of Campbell, with a mixture of seasoned officers and younger sailors pulled from other ships. Lieutenant Commander Henry T. Dawkins, a pragmatic officer with experience in both gunnery and engineering, had been given temporary command of the ship after her captain was incapacitated in a prior engagement. Dawkins understood that conventional tactics were untenable under the circumstances. The crew was simply too small to operate the ship in full battle readiness. Every station had to be prioritized, every function simplified. Technical challenges were compounded by the ship's damage history. Previous encounters with U-boats had left portions of the engine room in disrepair. One boiler was offline, reducing maximum speed, and several secondary guns had jammed. Electrical failures intermittently cut lighting and communications. Under normal conditions, repair parties would have been deployed across multiple shifts, but with limited manpower, only essential systems could be maintained. Navigating a large vessel under these constraints demanded ingenuity, improvisation, and above all, discipline. The enemy situation added further complexity. The Admiral Scheer was a well-armed pocket battleship, capable of outrunning most escorts while outgunning smaller vessels. Dawkins had to plan as if the ship could be engaged at any moment, relying not on firepower alone, but on maneuvering, stealth, and tactical cunning. His decisions would have immediate consequences for both the ship and the convoy under his protection. Morale aboard Campbell was fragile. Sailors had endured weeks without proper rest, enduring freezing decks and constant tension. Yet in the midst of fatigue, a small corps of officers and senior sailors maintained cohesion. They drilled, rehearsed emergency procedures, and familiarized themselves with all critical stations, not just their own. Redundancy became a survival tactic. One man might be responsible for steering, signaling, and monitoring engines simultaneously. The crew learned quickly that mistakes could not be absorbed. The Atlantic demanded perfection in execution. This was the environment in which the extraordinary takeover unfolded. A reduced yet highly disciplined crew, faced with an enormous and technically complex ship, would have to assert control over every function simultaneously. It was a high-stakes challenge unlike any they had previously encountered. Their actions would not only determine the fate of the vessel, but also influence the safety of the convoy and the wider strategic picture in the Atlantic. Every detail mattered: boiler pressure, rudder response, gunnery readiness, and signaling to distant ships. A single misjudgment could result in disaster: collision with ice, grounding, or exposure to enemy fire. Yet, the small crew pressed forward, blending skill with audacity, prepared to operate a warship far beyond their nominal numbers. In this moment, the line between routine duty and heroism blurred. The stage was now set for a series of angles that would illuminate the story from every perspective: human endurance, tactical brilliance, technological mastery, leadership under pressure, enemy calculation, and moral weight. These angles would reveal not only the mechanics of taking control of a large warship, but the extraordinary human effort that made it possible. The human element aboard HMS Campbell was the heartbeat of the operation. A crew reduced to a fraction of its normal complement faced physical and mental demands that would have crushed the unprepared. Each sailor was pushed beyond the ordinary limits of endurance. Cold winds cut through woolen uniforms, frost formed on exposed skin, and the constant drone of the engines mixed with the groaning hull of the ship, creating a sensory assault that dulled sleep and frayed nerves. Lieutenant Commander Dawkins understood that leadership alone could not substitute for manpower. He relied on careful observation and delegation, placing sailors where their skills would have the greatest impact. Engineers rotated through the boiler room in exhausting shifts. Gunners double-checked each piece of artillery, and lookouts scanned the horizon without relief. Mistakes were costly. One misread gauge or misaligned lever could compromise the ship's stability or alert enemy raiders. Yet, despite fatigue, fear, and isolation, a remarkable cohesion emerged. The crew adapted quickly, improvising roles beyond their training. A young sailor might steer the ship while relaying engine room reports, then rush to assist a gun crew under simulated attack drills. Bonds of trust formed in the crucible of necessity. It was human ingenuity, resilience, and sheer determination that allowed a handful of men to function as a fully manned warship, transforming potential disaster into a controlled, if precarious, operation. Tactically, controlling a large warship with a small crew required a radical rethinking of naval doctrine. Traditional formations, battle procedures, and defensive measures assumed hundreds of hands operating in concert. With only a skeleton crew, Dawkins had to simplify maneuvers, limit speed, and prioritize stations essential for survival. Convoy escort strategy depended on anticipation and coordination. Campbell could not engage the enemy head-on without risk. Instead, the crew relied on subtlety and deception. Engine throttles were adjusted to appear as normal operations while conserving fuel and minimizing exposure. Gunnery drills focused on accuracy rather than volume of fire, and radar, though primitive, was monitored continuously for early warnings. Every action was measured against both the ship's reduced capacity and the threat posed by German raiders. Navigation became an exercise in precision. Steering a cruiser through ice-laden waters, under fog, and while performing evasive maneuvers demanded acute situational awareness. Dawkins coordinated maneuvers using signal flags and megaphones when electrical systems faltered, Each course adjustment was calculated to minimize risk, protect the convoy, and maintain the illusion of a fully operational ship. The tactical brilliance lay not in firepower, but in managing vulnerability while retaining offensive potential. Technology was both an ally and an obstacle. HMS Campbell was equipped with 12 6-inch guns, multiple anti-aircraft batteries, and mechanical fire control systems. Operating them required precise synchronization, a near-impossible task for a skeleton crew. Each gun turret depended on power supplied from the engines and careful coordination with spotters. One misalignment could jam a turret or misfire a shell, creating risks for both crew and ship. Boilers and turbines demanded constant monitoring. Steam pressure had to remain within strict tolerances to prevent explosions or engine failure. Yet only a few trained engineers were available, meaning that one person often monitored multiple systems simultaneously. Electrical failures further complicated operations. Lighting flickered in critical compartments, and communications intermittently cut out, forcing reliance on manual signaling methods. Even navigation was a technological challenge. Sextants, charts, and compasses provided guidance, but rudimentary radar and early sonar were unreliable in stormy, fog-heavy conditions. Every maneuver required cross-checking instruments, estimating drift, and compensating for environmental variables, all while under the constant stress of potential enemy contact. Technology was powerful, but in the hands of an understaffed crew, it demanded extraordinary skill and concentration. The combination of human endurance, tactical improvisation, and technological mastery created a delicate balance. Each element reinforced the others. The crew's resilience allowed complex operations to continue. Tactical ingenuity reduced exposure to danger, and precise handling of technology prevented disaster. Together, they enabled a handful of sailors to manage a vessel built for hundreds, a feat that would normally seem impossible. Leadership was the axis around which the entire operation turned. Lieutenant Commander Henry T. Dawkins, though temporarily in command, exhibited a rare combination of calm decisiveness and adaptability. With a skeletal crew, traditional command hierarchies were impractical. Dawkins had to anticipate failures, prioritize tasks, and communicate clearly under extreme pressure. His orders were concise, often relayed verbally or with hand signals, and always focused on preserving both the ship and the crew. Dawkins also understood the psychological dimension of leadership. Morale was fragile. Exhaustion and fear were constant companions. He rotated responsibilities, allowing sailors brief but crucial moments of rest, and reinforced the importance of collective responsibility. Every crew member was reminded that their contribution mattered, that their actions directly impacted the ship's survival. Leadership was not just issuing commands. It was sustaining the human network that kept the warship functioning against impossible odds. From a German point of view, the situation aboard Campbell was a calculated opportunity. Reports of isolated or undercrewed vessels were rare but highly prized intelligence. Enemy reconnaissance aircraft and U-boats monitored convoys for weak points, and a lightly manned cruiser presented both risk and reward. For the Admiral Scheer, intercepting a vessel like Campbell promised a tactical advantage, but only if the crew's limitations were correctly assessed. The German forces had to make decisions with incomplete information. Misjudging the crew's capabilities could result in failed interception, wasted munitions, or exposure to counterattack. Conversely, underestimating the small crew risked allowing a damaged but still operational ship to escape, potentially disrupting raider operations. The enemy perspective highlights the razor-thin margin between success and failure in naval warfare, where a few determined sailors could shift the balance unexpectedly. The moral stakes were subtle but profound. A crew taking command of a large vessel with insufficient personnel faced choices that blurred conventional rules of engagement. For instance, rationing power between propulsion, gunnery, and life support systems meant prioritizing human survival over mechanical performance. Decisions about when to engage or avoid the enemy involved ethical calculations, balancing the protection of convoy ships, the lives of their own sailors, and the avoidance of unnecessary civilian casualties in contested waters. Furthermore, the act of improvising operations traditionally reserved for hundreds of crew members raised questions about responsibility and accountability. Every order issued by Dawkins carried weight beyond immediate survival. Misjudgment could lead to loss of life, the destruction of the ship, and strategic consequences. The ethical dimension underscores that extraordinary skill alone was not enough. The crew needed judgment, restraint, and moral clarity under pressure. Viewed together, these angles illustrate a complex and interconnected challenge. Human endurance allowed the crew to operate the ship despite severe shortages of manpower. Tactical ingenuity maximized the ship's limited capabilities while minimizing exposure to enemy action. Technological mastery turned intricate machinery into effective tools under extreme constraints. Leadership provided cohesion and clarity. The enemy's perspective framed the stakes in real terms, and moral judgment ensured the choices made were responsible and sustainable. The story of HMS Campbell is not just a tale of a small crew handling a large warship. It is a study in adaptability, courage, and decision-making under pressure. Each angle reinforces the others, revealing the delicate balance required to survive, maintain operational capability, and confront the unpredictable dynamics of wartime naval engagements. The small crew's struggle was about more than mechanics or firepower. It was a human drama played out across steel decks, stormy seas, and the shadow of enemy forces. This interplay of skill, courage, and circumstance set the stage for the decisive moments that would follow. The turning point where strategy, improvisation, and determination collided in a single, gripping climax. January 18th, 1942. Just after dawn, the North Atlantic remained a vast expanse of gray, the sun a pale smear behind heavy clouds. HMS Campbell's skeleton crew moved with silent precision, each man acutely aware that a single mistake could doom them. The ship's engines hummed unevenly, one boiler offline, while the waves battered her port side, throwing the crew off balance as they navigated the slick deck. Lieutenant Commander Dawkins gathered his senior men on the bridge. The instruments read as expected, yet the absence of a full crew meant that each station had to cover multiple functions. One engineer monitored engine pressures while another adjusted the throttles. A lookout scanned the horizon while also relaying gun targeting information. Dawkins gave crisp, deliberate orders, knowing the ship's survival depended on flawless execution. The tension was almost tangible, vibrating through the steel under their feet. Suddenly, a periscope silhouette was sighted on the horizon. The German raider, Admiral Scheer, had identified the cruiser and began an intercept course. The small crew had anticipated this possibility, but had no room for error. Dawkins ordered evasive maneuvers. The ship's reduced speed complicated turns, while icy seas made handling treacherous. Yet the crew executed with near-miraculous precision. Engines responded to throttles. Rudder adjustments turned the vessel without capsizing, and gunners prepared for potential engagement despite missing personnel. Inside the engine room, one engineer, Corporal James Murray, worked under extreme duress. The pressure gauges fluctuated dangerously as he maintained the remaining boilers. Sweat and grime covered his face. One slip could trigger a catastrophic steam explosion. Every rotation of a valve, every adjustment of a lever was performed with a combination of skill, instinct, and fear. His work allowed the ship to maintain speed sufficient to evade torpedoes and position for defensive action. On deck, gunners manually calibrated their targeting instruments, working 2 turrets each instead of the usual single assignments. Ammunition had to be ferried quickly, but the small crew coordinated flawlessly. Each shell loaded, each gun aimed, and each lookout report contributed to a precarious equilibrium between survival and disaster. Even minor delays could give the enemy the upper hand, yet the crew pressed forward, synchronized like clockwork despite exhaustion and cold. At 8:15, the first warning shots rang out. German reconnaissance aircraft had confirmed the ship's movement, and the Admiral Scheer opened fire from a distance. The small crew responded immediately, coordinating turret fire while adjusting the ship's course to minimize exposure. The range was long. Shells splashed harmlessly nearby, but the psychological impact was immense. Each man was acutely aware that they were outnumbered, outgunned, and operating at the limits of human endurance. Meanwhile, Dawkins remained calm on the bridge, issuing orders that balanced aggression with caution. He directed the ship in zigzag patterns to make targeting more difficult, coordinated with gunners for optimal firing arcs, and managed crew rotations to prevent total exhaustion. His leadership transformed fear into controlled action, ensuring the ship remained a functional fighting unit despite its skeletal crew. Below deck, communication systems were intermittently failing. Telegraph lines sparked, radios cut out, and electrical panels flickered. Messengers ran between compartments, carrying vital updates on engine status, gun readiness, and enemy positioning. Each journey through the narrow corridors risked injury or delay. Yet, despite the technical failures, the crew maintained a continuous flow of information, each man aware that a single miscommunication could result in disaster. By late morning, the ship had maneuvered into a safer position, temporarily evading the German raider while maintaining convoy protection. The crew's efforts had not gone unnoticed. Enemy scouts had underestimated the ship's operational capacity. The combination of human endurance, tactical improvisation, and technological mastery had allowed the small crew to assert control over a warship built for hundreds. Every decision, every action, and every adjustment was critical. The crew had not only survived the initial encounter, they had demonstrated the extraordinary potential of a small, disciplined team operating under extreme pressure. Yet, the danger was far from over. The next hours would demand further precision, courage, and ingenuity as the enemy recalibrated and the Atlantic continued to test the limits of men and machinery alike. The stage was set for the decisive moments that would determine whether this daring operation would end in triumph or catastrophe. The turning point was approaching, a test of skill, leadership, and endurance that would define the legacy of HMS Campbell's small crew. By midday, the North Atlantic remained a swirling expanse of gray, waves tossing HMS Campbell as though testing the resolve of her crew. The German raider Admiral Scheer had adjusted course, closing the distance. Shellfire now echoed across the water, striking perilously close to the cruiser. The small crew, exhausted but unwavering, moved with machine-like precision, each member performing tasks beyond their usual roles. Dawkins stood on the bridge, eyes scanning the horizon, ears tuned to the rumble of distant guns and the creaking of his ship. He issued orders calmly, prioritizing defensive positioning while preparing the ship for limited offensive action. The crew executed evasive zigzag maneuvers, making targeting difficult for the enemy while maintaining the necessary course to protect the convoy. Every turn, every throttle adjustment was calculated with exacting care. Below deck, Corporal Murray and the engineers maintained the remaining boilers under extreme strain. One boiler was close to critical pressure, and a minor miscalculation could cause catastrophic failure. Murray's hands flew over valves and gauges, adjusting steam flow with the precision of a surgeon. The success of the ship's speed and the survival of the crew depended entirely on his skill. The gunners faced a similar ordeal. Turrets designed for single operators were now managed by pairs, coordinating loading, aiming, and firing under extreme time pressure. A shell fired too early or misaligned could jam the turret or even injure a crew member. Yet, through intense focus and teamwork, the guns remained operational. They fired sparingly, each shot deliberate, forcing the enemy to reconsider the ship's capabilities. At 13:45, a German torpedo narrowly missed the port side, exploding in a geyser of seawater. The crew's quick reaction and altering course had saved the ship. The psychological toll was immense. The near miss was a stark reminder of how thin the margin between survival and catastrophe could be. Yet, it also reinforced their discipline, showing that their improvisation and coordination were effective even against a superior foe. Dawkins made a critical decision, recognizing that their best chance to avoid destruction lay in deception. He ordered the crew to simulate full activity. Signal lights flashed as if a full complement manned every station. Smoke belched from operational funnels, and the ship's pattern of movement mimicked a fully staffed vessel. The ruse worked. The enemy paused, unsure of Campbell's real strength and preparedness. Inside the cramped compartments, every crew member pushed past fatigue. Sailors relayed messages between bridge and engine room, tended to minor damages caused by near misses, and ensured that essential systems remained online. Their collective effort transformed the vessel from a near-disabled cruiser into a functioning warship, despite being staffed at a fraction of its intended capacity. By 1530, the Admiral Scheer had broken off direct engagement, opting to shadow the convoy rather than risk confrontation. The skeletal crew of Campbell had achieved a remarkable feat. They had controlled a large warship in active combat conditions, maneuvering it effectively maintaining critical systems, and projecting enough strength to deter a superior opponent. The final moments of the engagement underscored both the human and technological stakes. Dawkins coordinated minor course adjustments to lead the convoy to safer waters. Engineers monitored boiler pressures to ensure consistent propulsion. Gunners kept their stations manned, ready for any sudden enemy action. The crew's synchronized effort, born from necessity, courage, and meticulous improvisation, was what had carried them through the ordeal. By early evening, the North Atlantic returned to its deceptive calm. HMS Campbell, battered but intact, had survived what seemed an insurmountable challenge. The crew's exhaustion was profound, yet there was a quiet satisfaction in their achievement. Against overwhelming odds, they had turned a skeleton crew into a functional warship, evaded a far more powerful adversary, and ensured the convoy's continued safety. The decisive moment had passed, but its impact would resonate far beyond the immediate engagement. The operation demonstrated that with leadership, coordination, and human ingenuity, even a small crew could master a vessel designed for hundreds. The lessons learned that day would inform future naval strategy, crew training, and the understanding of what was possible under extreme duress. By the evening of January 18th, 1942, HMS Campbell had returned to relative calm, her hull scarred but intact, her engines humming steadily under the careful watch of a handful of exhausted sailors. The immediate danger had passed, but the ship and her crew bore the marks of extraordinary strain. Damage reports revealed minor hull breaches from near-miss shells and superficial damage to superstructure fittings, yet all critical systems, propulsion, navigation, and gunnery, remained operational. The skeleton crew had preserved what full complement crews might have struggled to maintain under standard conditions. Lieutenant Commander Dawkins quickly prepared a comprehensive report for the Admiralty, detailing not only the ship's status, but the operational improvisations employed by his reduced crew. These accounts emphasized how a small number of trained and disciplined personnel could sustain functionality across essential stations. Boiler pressures were carefully documented, steering maneuvers logged, gunnery adjustments recorded, and communication challenges noted. The report highlighted human ingenuity as much as technical skill, serving as a blueprint for future emergency scenarios aboard large warships. The morale aboard Campbell, though fatigued, was surprisingly elevated. Sailors recognized the significance of what they had achieved: survival against overwhelming odds, the successful protection of convoy ships, and the demonstration of personal and collective skill under extreme conditions. While exhaustion was palpable, faces pale from cold, hands raw from constant manual labor, there was also a quiet pride in their accomplishment. Letters sent home later captured this duality: fear and tension interlaced with the satisfaction of mastery over impossible circumstances. Allies and superiors quickly took notice. Naval analysts highlighted the operation as an example of the potential for small crews to maintain operational capacity under extraordinary duress. It challenged assumptions about manpower requirements and reinforced the importance of redundancy and cross-training. This event became a case study, not only in survival and tactical improvisation, but also in leadership and human resilience. From a strategic perspective, the encounter had immediate benefits. By maintaining course and deterring the Admiral Scheer, Campbell ensured the safety of her convoy. Vital supplies, food, fuel, and military equipment continued toward Britain, sustaining the war effort at a time when every ship mattered. The success of a single skeleton crew, thus, had ripple effects far beyond the immediate engagement, influencing the broader war effort in the Atlantic. However, the risks have been extraordinary. The operation highlighted the vulnerability of overextended crews, the fragility of technological systems when understaffed, and a razor-thin margin for error in naval operations. Analysts later noted that while luck played a role, the skill, coordination, and adaptability of Campbell's crew had been decisive. The event was a stark reminder of both the perils and the possibilities inherent in wartime naval service. As dawn approached the following day, the ship sailed into safer waters, her crew exhausted but resolute. Engineers rotated through brief shifts, gunners inspected and cleaned their equipment, and lookouts remained vigilant against any remaining threats. The immediate aftermath was a mixture of recovery, documentation, and reflection, essential work for ensuring both the ship's continued operational readiness and the long-term lessons for the Navy. The extraordinary feat of Campbell's small crew was now part of naval records, a testament to courage, discipline, and ingenuity under pressure. But while the immediate consequences were clear, the broader ramifications for naval strategy, morale, and doctrine would unfold in the coming months, shaping how future operations accounted for both human and technological limitations. The impact of HMS Campbell's January 1942 engagement extended far beyond the immediate survival of the ship and her convoy. Naval historians later noted that the operation illustrated the potential for extraordinary human initiative to compensate for reduced manpower, challenging long-held assumptions about the limits of crewed warship operations. Admiralty reports emphasized that small, well-trained teams could maintain combat readiness across essential stations, provided leadership, discipline, and adaptability were exceptional. Strategically, the success reinforced convoy safety protocols in the Atlantic. Campbell's survival demonstrated that even partially crewed vessels could deter enemy raiders, buying critical time for merchant ships to reach port. The lesson was clear. Human ingenuity and improvisation could multiply the effectiveness of limited resources, a concept that would influence Allied naval operations throughout the remainder of the war. Commanders began encouraging cross-training and contingency drills, ensuring that sailors could fulfill multiple roles if circumstances demanded. Psychologically, the operation had a profound effect on both the crew and the broader naval community. For Campbell's sailors, the experience forged an unbreakable bond, instilling confidence in their own abilities and reinforcing the value of trust and teamwork. Letters and diaries from survivors described a heightened awareness of human resilience, emphasizing how courage under extreme stress could shape outcomes in seemingly hopeless situations. Among other naval officers, the episode became emblematic of what a disciplined, resourceful crew could achieve against a numerically or technologically superior enemy. The enemy, too, learned lessons from the encounter. German reconnaissance reports noted the surprising effectiveness of the undercrewed vessel. Analysts later reflected that misjudging Campbell's capabilities had resulted in the missed opportunity to strike a significant blow against the convoy. The episode demonstrated that over-reliance on assumptions about crew strength could be dangerous, reinforcing the unpredictability inherent in naval warfare. The broader historical implications were significant. Campbell's operation exemplified the evolving interplay between technology, manpower, and human decision-making in mid-20th century naval combat. Large warships, once thought dependent on hundreds of sailors for effective operation, were shown to be controllable in extremis by a determined, adaptable crew. This understanding influenced future ship design, emergency protocols, and naval training programs, embedding lessons about flexibility, redundancy, and the capacity for improvisation under duress. Moreover, the event contributed to the cultural memory of naval warfare. The story of a small crew taking control of a massive warship became a symbol of courage, ingenuity, and resolve in the face of overwhelming odds. It underscored the reality that in war, human factors, training, leadership, and morale could be as decisive as guns, armor, or displacement. The narrative reinforced the principle that leadership and skill could multiply the effectiveness of limited resources, a lesson repeatedly cited in post-war naval doctrine. By the time Campbell reached safe harbor, the operation had already begun to resonate in broader discussions about naval strategy and human capacity. The Admiralty debriefs, engineering analyses, and crew testimonials were meticulously recorded, forming a comprehensive case study for future officers and strategists. The operation had proven that extraordinary circumstances could produce extraordinary results, and that the resilience of human ingenuity could tip the scales even in technologically complex and high-stakes environments. The immediate danger had passed, but the legacy of Campbell's small crew continued to grow. The actions of that handful of sailors had ensured the survival of a vital warship, safeguarded a convoy, and demonstrated principles that would shape Allied naval operations for the remainder of the war. From the freezing decks of the North Atlantic to the halls of Naval Command, the episode became a testament to the delicate balance between human endurance, technical skill, and strategic foresight. The story of HMS Campbell and her small crew is more than an isolated naval incident. It is a testament to human ingenuity under pressure. In a war defined by machinery, firepower, and strategy, it was the courage, skill, and discipline of a handful of sailors that turned a near-impossible scenario into a triumph. They reminded the world that even in the most complex and unforgiving systems, human decision-making and resilience could prevail. The Atlantic that January was merciless. Freezing winds, towering waves, and an ever-present enemy tested the limits of both men and machines. Yet, it was precisely this environment that revealed the extraordinary potential of adaptability. The crew of Campbell did not have the numbers, the full complement of systems, or the luxury of time. They had only each other, their training, and the quiet determination to master what had been designed for hundreds. Their success was as much about character as it was about skill. In the broader sweep of naval history, this episode illustrates a profound truth. Technology alone does not determine outcomes. Large warships, with their engines, gunnery, and communications, rely ultimately on human hands and minds. When those hands are few and the minds focused, the results can be astonishing. Lessons drawn from this operation on redundancy, cross-training, and the psychological management of crews would echo throughout Allied navies, shaping strategy and training for the remainder of the war. Yet beyond strategy and systems, the story resonates on a human level. It is a story of courage, of ordinary men achieving the extraordinary when circumstance demanded it. Theirs was not heroism born of glory or recognition, but of necessity, a quiet, relentless mastery of skill and instinct in the face of danger. In those moments, the Atlantic became more than a battlefield. It became a proving ground for human perseverance. HMS Campbell's journey that January day endures as a symbol, a reminder that even against overwhelming odds, a small, determined team can assert control, overcome fear, and shape the course of events. It is a story that transcends the mechanics of war, leaving behind a legacy of resilience, ingenuity, and the unyielding human spirit.